Hi, I'm Phyllis and my website is southernfrugal.com. I have had really multiple requests over the years for how I do meal planning. And the truth is I don't really do meal planning as much as I do nutritional planning. That's kind of what I do. But y'all are certainly familiar with the smoothies. And in the smoothies, I try to get everything that's in the food group pyramid that the government recommends, just not as much as they recommend. So that would be some kind of grain. Now, I don't do let me show you. I copied this down. There's the pyramid. Now, our little pyramid is kind of turned upside down because on the smoothies, which would be our morning meal, I use some of all the group really in the smoothies. I use the greens, and then for protein I use like chickpeas, peanut butter. I've even used navy beans, large lima beans, lentils, chickpeas. I really like the chickpeas and that type of thing. And I always, or almost always, use 2 bananas. And remember now, I'm making 64 ounces, which is enough for us for 2 days. And also I use some kind of nuts most of the time. And then of course I use fruits, and I always use oranges to kill the taste of the greens. And of course the greens being kale. Sometimes I use collards. The other day I used, I was out of greens, so I used frozen broccoli. And I did not tell Mr. Bucky until after he had drank it and said how good it was. So, and I try to use carrots, sweet potatoes, sometimes celery, and that kind of thing. And for the grains, it's usually oatmeal and cream of wheat, whole grain cream of wheat. I use that a lot, but I have used the quinoa and I've used the chia seeds, but not very often. I just simply don't like them. And for the liquid, I use filtered ice water. So, and of course the fruits are varied. One of our favorites, of course, is the strawberries, but we have blueberries and strawberries, certainly sometimes twice a week, and that kind of thing. I also use mango and end up putting ginger in the mango, which I really super like. And we use peanut butter. I try not to use peanut butter every day in the smoothies. I try to vary it. So anyway, that would be breakfast, and I've done, I'm trying to think how many, probably over 200 videos on making smoothies. So that's our first meal of the day. And the planning for that is just not really planning at all. I simply get all the ingredients I will need and freeze them. And even the oatmeal and cream of wheat, I cook and then put it in big blobs on a cookie sheet and freeze it. So the green smoothies are our breakfast. That's it. I can't even probably count on 3 fingers the number of times in the last 4 years we have not had the green smoothies. So that takes care of breakfast. Now for the main meal of the day, which we usually have around 3 o'clock, sometimes it's later, but we don't really get hungry until then after having the smoothies in the morning. I would say most of the time anywhere from 7:30 to maybe even 8:30 every morning. But anyway, I want to, before I get to the main meal of the day and how I plan that out, I want to talk about the government's, what they say we need. Now, I was vegan for 2 full years, and I could never get Mr. Bucky to go along with it. He just wouldn't. So I finally just gave up. And so during that time, of course, I didn't eat any animal products whatsoever. And I felt great, by the way. I really felt great. But Mr. Bucky would go out and get a hamburger, or he'd bring something home, and he just wouldn't, he just wanted no part of it. I mean, he went along somewhat, but not really. So anyway, I said, okay, well, if we go back to meat, then could we just have 4 ounces, no more than that, or only 4 ounces a day of animal protein. So if y'all have looked at some of my full meals, you know that most of the time it would be rare for it to be over 4 ounces. So, and we also have some kind of dried beans a couple of times a week, usually. And a lot of times that's pintos, although recently it's been the Mayokoba beans. I love them. And I also love chickpeas, and Mr. Bucky super likes the chickpeas also. The other thing that we have done, and we've been doing this now, I'm guessing, for maybe 6 months, Mr. Bucky lost a lot of weight doing this, which was a total shock to me. I don't think I lost an ounce, but he always had more salt things than I did. I just don't like a lot of salt in my food either. And when we go out, sometimes the food that we eat out to me tastes too salty. But anyway, he cut back on the salt, and the main thing he stopped doing was eating those fried pig skins. Y'all know what I'm talking about? They come in a bag, they sell them in every grocery store, and they're just as salty as they can be. And he used to just eat those like there was no tomorrow. He really did. He would buy them 2 bags at a time. Anytime he went to the P.O. box, he would stop and get the pigskin things. And he never, now we don't keep a salt shaker out anywhere, but somehow he always managed to have more salt on his food than I did. So anyway, he lost a lot of weight doing that, and now the food, he never complains about something not being salty enough ever. And I wanted to point this out. The reason he did the salt thing is because the doctor recommended it. And I think for anybody our age, you probably really do need to be on a low salt diet for sure. And so really, in the beginning, it was kind of hard because, of course, I didn't use that much salt anyway. But I even cut back on the food I was cooking on the salt that I would normally use. And but anyway, we cut back to 1,500 milligrams a day, which is about 3/4 of a teaspoon in everything you eat. So that pretty well eliminates potato chips and a lot of processed foods for sure. And particularly things like if you get stuff that's frozen, unless it says low salt, it's going to have a lot of salt in it. So you might, just blow the whole day on just one thing, and it might be something you didn't even like that much. So it's just required to be on every label. So when I can find even canned goods that are no salt, I always get those. And of course, if you're making fresh vegetables or frozen vegetables, I don't think they ever have any salt in them unless it's something like pre-coated okra that you fry. That's certainly got salt in it. But just regular frozen green beans, frozen lima beans, and broccoli and all, none of that has any salt in it, per the label, of course. But anyway, I wanted to mention that. Because a lot of y'all noticed that Mr. Bucky lost weight to his delight, I might add. He really couldn't believe that he could lose weight by just simply cutting way back on salt, but that's exactly what happened, and we were just delighted with it. But anyway, the other thing I wanted to mention was about a lot of y'all have sent in recipes to do with the Jell-O, which is great. I read every one of them. But one of the things a lot of y'all mentioned was in the your mothers or grandmothers or whoever would make a Jell-O dessert and put Cool Whip in it. And I got a little story on that, okay? This was, let me see if I can guess the year. I believe it was about 1966, if I recall correctly. I was working for the city of Newport News, Virginia, in the tax collection office. And every year the taxes were due December the 5th. And so we worked, oh man, we really had a lot of work. And of course, that was before the days of computers, so people were lined up out the office doors. We had, I think, 6 women that worked up front collect. It was kind of almost like a bank, and they would just be lined up out the door and paying their taxes because nobody wanted to pay them ahead of the deadline. And so after all that was over with, a couple of weeks later, we would have a big Christmas party right in our office. Everybody would bring a covered dish, and it was really nice. And so one of the ladies that I worked with, her name was Evelyn. She was a much older lady. I think she was probably at that point in her 60s. And so somebody had brought a dessert, and they had put Cool Whip on it. And so she was kind of like sort of behind me as we were going around the table. She said, "Oh, don't get any of that." I said, "Why? It looks so good." And she said, "That's Cool Whip." And I said, "Well, what is Cool Whip?" Because I'd never even heard of it before. And she said, "Well, Cool Whip is really Crisco shortening that they beat up and put sugar and vanilla in." And of course I didn't get any, but that always stuck with me. So a few days later, I guess I was talking with her about it, and she said, "Well, I'll tell you what, go to the store and get you a little small container of it, bring it home, and put it in a little pot on the stove and melt it and see what you've got." I did that. It's oil, y'all. It's just totally oil. And even the ones that now they've got some whipping cream in it, I think, but they use that, I hope I say this right, caseinate, which is really a milk product that comes from milk. And I'm sure it does taste good, but y'all, I can't use it. After Miss Evelyn told me all that, and I saw for myself, now whipping cream is also oil, but the oil is butter and it's not hydrogenated. So that's the problem with Crisco, which I still use, by the way, but not anything like I used to. So it's Crisco, margarine, all of that that's what makes it look the way it looks. They somehow mix hydrogen in it, and they think that that's a problem to do with the fats. And so in recent years, they've certainly discovered that animal fat is far better for you than the trans fats, which are hydrogenated. It's just that simple, really. So anyway, that's my story on Cool Whip. So when y'all send me recipes to do with Cool Whip and Jell-O, I'm probably never ever going to do that. I just can't bring myself to do it. But I could do it with whipping cream. I definitely could. So anyway, now I want to talk to y'all about our main meal of the day and about meal planning. Now, I don't really do meal planning, and the only time I would ever do meal planning is if we go to the beach when we would all the family would get together, and I really had to plan for 3 meals a day because there were so many people there. And I also, most of the time, I ended up waiting until I got there to get the groceries because they had a Piggly Wiggly there on Edisto Island, and we'd get all settled in, and I would just go to the grocery store the very day that we arrived. And so I had to have meal planning then because I was cooking for a lot more people. But now it's just me and Mr. Bucky, and I have never really planned out a whole week or 2 week or a month of meals. Now I have frozen meals that like freeze maybe 10 packs of lasagna that I'd cooked, and well, y'all have seen those videos where I do the little meals and I freeze them, and that takes a little bit of planning, but then you can have them whenever you want them. So that's kind of my philosophy. I can't really plan meals for the whole week because I'll get really bored, y'all. I really will. So what I do is plan on the foods that we're going to eat and then put them together during the week on whatever I think that might be good that day. Or if Mr. Bucky says, "Well, why don't we have some pork chops and cabbage tonight?" then we'll do that. I have the option of doing that. So in light of all that, one of the things that I do is make sure that for at least 10 days I've got enough greens of some kind that we can have for a meal. Now when I say greens, I'm talking about anything green. Green beans, collards, kale, spinach, whatever. Any kind of leafy green vegetable, and of course broccoli falls right into that category. I don't really count cauliflower because it's not green, y'all, but I definitely look for something green. I also look for a starch, so that would be potatoes, rice, pasta, and there are probably other things I don't remember right now, but I always make sure I have enough of that. And then there are always the extras like celery, bell peppers, and onions. And so, not that they're all carbs, but you know, to flavor things with. And of course, the meat, since I'm most of the time at least 2 days a week. I really like it when it's 3 days a week, but at least 2 days a week, we're going to have some kind of dried beans. So when you've got everything there, well-stocked freezer and pantry, then you can decide what you want based on that. And of course, for bread, we have biscuits, French bread, which I get at Walmart because it's only $1 a loaf. Let's see, and I can't think what else. I had me some notes here. Let me see. Yeah, on the grains, using or the breads really. Some kind of bread. I can't really eat a meal unless I've got bread, unless there's rice. I don't particularly like bread and rice too. So in planning a meal, I really don't plan everything out and write it all down, again, because I would get bored, you know, and I don't like for other people, and particularly not Mr. Bucky, to know exactly what we're having, because then he'll start talking about it, and then by that time I've changed my mind. So, like for instance, now when we have spaghetti, he loves spaghetti. So when we have spaghetti, I always have a salad, and I always have usually garlic bread with that. And so you've got the pasta, you've got some meat and cheese, and you've got a salad. So to me, that's a full meal. And of course the bread, and y'all know we always drink tea with our meals. So when you look at the government's chart, they say you should have 2 to 3 servings of milk products. That just doesn't happen in our house. I buy probably 1/2 gallon of milk maybe every 10 days. I try to go 10 days without going to the store, but sometimes if I have not frozen the smoothies, I need some fresh organic baby greens for the smoothies, and I might have to go back to the store. And I also was guilty of going back to the store when we started on the Jell-O. Man, we just love the Jell-O, and it's made a really big difference, certainly for me and my knee that I kind of got injured years ago. I have had no problem with it since we started on the Jell-O, and so it definitely works. All right, so that's all I can think of, y'all. We just have the smoothies in the morning, and then we have the main meal of the day, usually around 3 o'clock, and then at night, we can have anything. We could have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We could have cereal. And every once in a while, I will fix what Mr. Bucky calls upside down breakfast, where we might have some bacon and eggs, but that's not very often. But I do like that much better at night than I ever liked it for breakfast. I'm not sure why. But anyway, so that's the kind of meal planning I do. I come up with greens, some kind of vegetable, preferably 2 vegetables, and I like to look at the color. So if y'all look back at some of my videos on the full meals, you're going to see how it's arranged on the plate. Now, on some of those videos, when we're having cabbage, it doesn't look very green on the camera, but of course cabbage is considered a green leafy vegetable. Not as good as something like collards, kale, or mustard greens or turnip greens, but still good. And so I use that, the cabbage too, and plus I love cabbage with pork. So again, on the meat, we're keeping it to try very hard to keep it to 4 ounces, and no matter what the protein for the meal is. And so again, not much planning involved there. I have done this, in my 70s now, and I've just cooked for so long, y'all. I pretty much don't even almost have to have a list, except for things like toiletries and stuff like that, and dog food. But I know to get the greens either frozen or fresh. Prefer fresh, but that can't always be in the grocery store. But frozen works too. It's certainly just as nutritious as fresh is. Maybe doesn't taste quite as good. But anyway, so that's, I've had so many requests for how I do meal planning. And the answer is I don't do meal planning. I do grocery shopping planning by simply knowing what kind of carbs I have in the cabinet, knowing if I have potatoes or not, knowing if I have rice or not, pasta, and then I kind of go from there. I always know what kind of greens I have, always. And we try to have some kind of greens other than the smoothies every morning, every day. We try really hard to do that. And I'll have to tell you another little story. My daughter had a friend, this was probably, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago, and they were talking about planning menus. And this friend of my daughter's used to, on her way home from work, she picked the kids up at the daycare. The kids always wanted to stop at McDonald's, and they always wanted the Happy Meal. And so my daughter and her were talking back and forth, and my daughter said, well, how do they get anything green if you stop at McDonald's? And the lady said, well, there are pickles on the hamburger. I mean, I don't think that's really considered a good vegetable unless it's a cucumber that's not a pickle. I mean, you might get some food value out of it, but really not much. So anyway, so y'all, I didn't want to disappoint y'all. This is why I put off doing this video for so long. I know you thought, well, I'll write out my menu planning like everybody else, or not everybody, but a lot of young women write out a menu and all that. And even when I was working, I didn't do that. I would plan the grocery shopping, meaning I knew I had to have X number of greens. I knew if I needed potatoes, carrots, sweet potatoes, and all that. I would know ahead of time. And even if I did write out a list, sometimes I would forget it, but I always knew what was on my list, because food and the health of the food we eat, to me, is very important. It's always been. But I also like really good food. I like to eat good food. So anyway, that's about it, y'all. And I don't want to disappoint anybody, but and you might have to look somewhere else for the way other women plan meals. I just don't do it that way. I like to decide what we're going to, usually I know what we're going to have for our main meal of the day just as soon as I get up in the morning. I usually know. And I also already have whatever it is. I don't have to go to the store or anything. I've already got whatever it is. So anyway, that's about it. Now, I do have a freezer. I have a big stand-up freezer, and I keep it pretty well stocked. And the turnover in the freezer is pretty quick. I'd say within a couple of months, most of the time I've used pretty much everything in the freezer, and we just got a big turnover. Same with the things like rice and pasta and all that. I try to get those in large amounts, and so I don't have to get those when I go to the grocery store and that kind of thing. All right, I don't know if this has helped y'all or not. It probably hasn't, but anyway, that will answer the question on how I meal plan. I don't. We will call it a grocery plan. In other words, I do everything at the grocery store or the farmer's market, one of the two. All right, y'all, we will see y'all next time. Bye-bye.